Are you a U.S. service member or veteran who finds it hard to fall or stay asleep? Do you feel tired and sleepy during the day? If you answered yes, you might be experiencing a common sleep disorder called insomnia. Cognitive behavior therapy is the #1 recommended treatment for insomnia. A new study conducted by the Center for Neuroscience and Regenerative Medicine is testing an online cognitive behavior therapy app that can be accessed by a computer or a smartphone. This study can be completed 100% online anywhere in the U.S. Active duty service members and veterans between the ages of 18 and 64 who are experiencing insomnia and have had a head injury might be eligible to participate. Interested in learning more about this opportunity? Call or text 301-456-5474 to connect with a member of the studies team. That's 301-456-5474. Or visit militaryveterandad.com/sleep.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. Hey guys, welcome back. It is episode 148. I am your host, Ben Cloy. Today we've got a great topic, but before we dive into that, I just want to thank our newest sponsor. You've been hearing about them on the podcast for the last few weeks. Uniformed Services Organization, Center for Neuroscience and Regenerative Medicine. They're doing great work in the form of insomnia and helping veterans understand insomnia and under different brain issues connected to insomnia. So if you haven't gone over and checked out their offer to be included in their study, if you felt like you fit into that, again, make sure you head over to militaryveterandad.com/sleep and all the information on how to get connected with that study and see if you fit into a free study that they're offering with a free at-home app to understand that. Make sure you go over there and check it out. Today's episode, let's talk about it. Have you ever felt stuck? I think at some point we have all felt stuck, unable to move past something. For veterans, this can often feel like we're stuck in war, on active duty. We're unable to transition out successfully. Now, today is a powerful episode on how it's not our fault. For most of us, we have never experienced a powerful ritual in our life to move from one state to the next. Frederick Marx is an internationally acclaimed Oscar and Emmy nominated director and writer with over 40 years in the film business. He was named a Chicago Tribune Artist of the Year, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a recipient of the Robert F. Kennedy Special Achievement Award. In 1994, the film Hoopstream is one of the highest-grossing non-musical documentaries in the United States history. And the International Documentary Association named it the best documentary of all time. To put a bow on that, he recently released a documentary focusing on veterans that's only available on Apple TV. You can go ahead and rent it over there. It's called The Veteran's Journey Home. So if you want to go over there and check it out, again, it's only on Apple TV. I put a link for the Apple TV down in the show notes as well. His company is called Warrior Films. They've got a great sequence of films over there. And he's also, the reason what came into my world is for a book that he recently released called Rites to a Good Life, Everyday Rituals of Healing and Transformation. And this isn't just a book about rituals for veterans. He uses veterans within the stories to articulate some clear examples of where we get stuck, where rituals really need to be in place, and we take those examples and bring them in to this episode. So without further ado, let's get started with Frederick Marx. And as always, if you want to hear my big, giant takeaway from this episode, hang on to the other side. Today, we are traveling all the way out to the Bay Area in California, and we are talking to a man that this conversation is going to be a hard one to end. He wrote a book on rituals, and rituals being this thing that we lost in our society, and listening to his book and the uniqueness of his audiobook really gets you excited. So today I'm talking with Frederick Marx because the conversations that he's having around rituals and this lost legacy of rituals is one that was built and made for veterans and has been lost within this process of having the military constructs that we do today. This process is missed. So welcome to the podcast, Frederick.
Thanks. Great to be here with you.
So I got to ask this big question in the beginning that it's kind of like it was back in my mind. In your life, if you look at like your life to this moment, like now understanding the power of rituals, what ritual really was missing early on in your life that was kind of like a birth moment maybe for when you figured out this puzzle piece that was missing?
Yeah, well, there's in a sense, what comes to mind are two answers to that question. But the first is when I was 9 years old, I lost my dad. And he had a heart attack and died suddenly. And he was literally in my life, seemingly forever one day, and then literally gone forever the next day. And on my way to the funeral, his younger brother, my uncle, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Well, Freddie, you're the man of the house now." And you better believe that I wanted to be that man, even though I was 9 years old. And I wanted to be, a support to my mother. I wanted to be a father figure to my older sister. And all of that is fairly impossible as a 9-year-old. But what makes it certainly impossible is that my uncle and no other man showed up, stuck around to show me how to become that man. So that planted a seed in my life that has lasted to this day, where I'm always considering looking at how do I become the man I want to be in this life. And so the ritual that finally occurred for me was 2 weeks before my 40th birthday. And I did a weekend workshop. It's a nonprofit organization that's international called the Mankind Project. The workshop is called the New Warrior Training Adventure, which is where, by the way, I took my company name, which is Warrior Films. And that weekend blew my mind and blew my heart open. And for the first time in my life, there were 45 plus men who showed up for me to show me how to become the man I wanted to be in this lifetime. And it was beautiful. And all of the lessons that I learned comprise what I call initiation into mature masculinity. I learned about accountability and integrity. I learned about emotional intelligence and that it's okay to express my emotions. I learned about mission, which veterans know deeply, but I didn't know because I'd never been a veteran. So I learned about my own personal mission in life, which I think is fundamental to everyone, but especially for veterans after service. They need to supplant that mission that they had from the government and the military with their own unique vision. They have to uncover that. And so on and so forth, including how to live cooperatively in community with men rather than competitively. So all of that contributed to what I consider to be my initiation into adulthood. Yeah, it took a long time. I was almost 40, but better late than never.
You're speaking to something, and I'm glad you went to that moment of being a 9-year-old boy that lost his dad, because as I'm talking to really dads of any walk of life, whether it be military veteran or non-veteran, I can't tell you how often I can almost sense it through their conversation or the lack of confidence in their words, that there's a version of themselves that when they look in the mirror, they don't see an adult body. They actually see a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old boy, in your case, looking back. And it's that 9-year-old boy waiting to be led by a father. And I often will say to them, like, have you ever felt like a 10-year-old boy just waiting to be led into life by a father? And they'll just be like, fuck, or start crying and lose it because they've never connected that. And it's that man in the mirror version that if we don't see someone worth leading and back, then we almost like take life in a neutral position from going forward. And I was interested because it happened at 40. When you think of like having such a late start on that initiation, what was some of the cost of not having that in those early 20 years of your adulthood?
Oh my God. Yeah, there's so many. Well, most of them, of course, manifest most adversely in adolescence, right? Because my understanding is that adolescents, when they act out, drugs, alcohol, combining drugs and alcohol and trying to drive 100 miles an hour down a city street, whatever challenges they come up with, they're basically unconscious ways that they're seeking initiation, that they're seeking to symbolically die to that childhood self and to be symbolically reborn into a new adult self. So, I ran into all of those obstacles. I mean, I just feel grateful that when I was, in my teens, that I never harm myself or anyone else. At least certainly not severely. I mean, I drove into my mother's garage. I just smacked right into the wall because I was so fucked up on drugs and alcohol. But, at least I never hurt anyone else. So, so that's, and I want to mention one other thing too, because you mentioned our missing fathers in effect. He comes to mind because he just died 5 days ago, Robert Bly. And he was, to my mind, one of the fathers of the so-called men's movement. And Robert Bly said many, many brilliant things. But one thing that I'll never forget, he said, American men are lost in life, unconsciously seeking their father's blessing. And I think that to some degree that summarizes what you're saying. We all see that 9-10-year-old in the mirror, that little boy in each of us who wanted nothing more than to be blessed by our fathers. But our fathers abandoned us. In my case, literally by dying, but in most people's cases, by working too much or being emotionally distant or by being consumed themselves with addictions, drugs and alcohol. So they weren't there for us to bless us.
I loved how you wrapped that up there. And I haven't studied a lot of the works of Robert Bly, but the name sounds familiar. And what I could hear is that men are really looking for this invitation to see how far we can go. And until we get that, it's almost we're afraid to engage with life. And we see it in so many of the ways that men show up stagnant, just kind of going through the rut of what consumerism and capitalism allows many men to do, which is just rinse and repeat the same cycle of overeating, not doing a lot of things, and just keeping a mediocre life, to be honest. And it's that invitation that, and we also, I've had to learn this through an episode that I did with, I only think his last name, Schneider. And he brought up that we often forget that while we may not have a father in front of us, we also have this relationship to the one father, God, and that we also always have this commonality that we're all brothers within this community. Whether we have a real physical father or not, we are all brothers. And it was actually taught to him by his son, who was 4 years old at the time. And his son was up to him. He's like, hey, we're brothers. And he's like, yeah, that's kind of cute, 4-year-old thing to say. He's like, no, God's my father and God's your father. That makes us brothers. And he's like, wow, what ripe wisdom coming from a 4-year-old boy. And it's also, though, that resistance to hear what God has in store for us, where we could go, and that person in front of us to help lead us on that story that really kind of gets us caught up in this crappy thought of, if I just stay hands off in life, I won't fuck it up.
Yeah. Well, you remind me of another issue about transitioning from veteran status to civilian life. Well, actually, not from active soldier status to civilian life. You'll always be a veteran. And that is brotherhood. And the experience that so many veterans have as brothers. And of course, now with women as well, brothers and sisters, but predominantly brothers, is unique and is something that most citizens crave, but don't know how to achieve. But the challenge, of course, for most veterans is once they're released from the military, what do they do without that brotherhood? What do they do without that supportive community? Who has their back anymore, right?
We don't even know what we had to even know that we need to replace it. That's the other thing that we don't really we think it's just it's there. And it's almost like pi with 3.14. You don't really know it's gone until it's gone. And you're like, man, that really made the universe work. And you don't realize you need to replace it.
And what makes it worse is what you say, too, is capitalist consumer culture, which tells us that whoever dies with the most toys wins, right? That you've got to consume. That's where you fill up your heart and soul, is through consumption. And we know that that's fucking bullshit, that doesn't work. We need heart-to-heart connection. We need that brotherhood, sisterhood in our lives. So that's the big challenge for veterans, where to find it.
When you think of, I was trying to think of a couple different ways to attack this conversation of rituals. And the first one that I want to kind of go in, and it really almost is the crux of the matter, that until someone reads, or you even write a book about rituals, or you hear a podcast about this, we are really absent of the language even to understand how to articulate the pain. I think the reason why therapy works so well is because someone else can help add language to a feeling that you can't get your fingers around. And it's that language component that we're really truly missing to even articulate this desire. Like that's really the first step is until you can articulate your desire, you have no idea what solution to plug into it. And I'm sure you've seen that in the journey of men who've gone through a ritual, and even yourself in your own story, that you didn't have this depth of language to articulate this pit of feeling until those men brought it into your life and reflected it back.
Well, and that's why for me, the term rites of passage has been like a North Star to guide my entire life. I mean, literally now it's been 25 years and I'm still writing books and making films using that framework as my guiding light. So for me, if we look at a normal given human lifespan from birth through to death, and assuming that we live to be 80, 90 years old, we're going to go through a number of key transformations in that lifetime, all of which can be described as rites of passage, right? From birth to toddlerhood to puberty, puberty to adolescence, adolescence to young adulthood to mature adulthood into eldership, eldership into death, right? And what frameworks of support culturally do we have in this society anymore to help us through these transitions? We don't have them anymore.
Even within the church community, there isn't a lot of framework other than even I'm a Catholic, so there's a lot of moments, but I can say I went through all the rites of initiation through Catholicism, and none of them prepared me to invite this idea of what God prepared me to be as a man.
Yeah. Well, so we need communities, we need elders, we need mentors to basically help us understand those things. And the reason that it's so useful, to get back to what you were saying, it helps us understand and contextualize our own pain, because we all suffer pain, tremendous pain and sorrow in this lifetime. There's no escaping it. The question is, what meaning do we extract from it? And rites of passage is a framework that helps us understand that symbolically we're dying to that earlier stage of our lives. And it's painful. We have to learn some new lessons, and we have to let go of some stuff that we're very, very attached to in order, again, to be symbolically reborn into some new phase of life.
You just sparked a new thought that I never really had together, that I've often always known that one of the first things that a man needs to really do to step in his own power is detach meaning from what the outside world may think or what he thinks the outside world, like detach the meaning of your shitty day doesn't give a verdict from the universe that you're a shitty human being. And it also equated to that because we are a consumer and we're looking for the value and worth in objects and what we can acquire, the value comes externally in consumerism as we buy it. And that almost also equates to where we get our value as a human being, which is the very first step where your value doesn't come from the outside world. It comes from a cultivation within your soul. And you don't get that when you're going to get your value from a status salary or a building or even a rank in the military. Your value as a human being is not determined by something you wear on your shoulder. It's determined by who you've invited yourself to be from the moment you were brought into this world.
Exactly. And another way to, in effect, describe this lifelong passage and all these different rites of passage is soul's journey. Each of us is on a journey to deepen our understanding of our own unique soul and that soul's unique purpose in the world. Because our job as human beings fundamentally is not that complicated. It's to figure out who we are and what our unique gifts are in this world, and then to give them as freely and widely as possible to our community. Because that's how community nourishes, how community flourishes, right? How community grows, because it finds a place to fit in every different, unique human being, because it needs all of us to make that collective whole.
And we also, as a father, myself, one thing that I always describe my kids is to help expose them to enough life and get them outside of their life, because I'm a big believer that 12 years of school does not tell you how you fit into life. You got to get outside that process in order to figure it out. And the more that happens, the better they're able to figure out how their gifts are uniquely designed to change the world. And if I do my job right, give them the fucking courage to go out there and fucking do it.
Exactly.
Like they actually believe when they're 18, you're like, I can fucking do it because my dad taught me how.
Exactly.
And they believe they have the power on day one. I know exactly where I'm going to go, and I know exactly how I'm going to be able to do it. And I believe I've been designed to do that.
Exactly. No, and I'm not a parent. That's the irony in some ways about this work that I do, because in the course of all my work and all my experience, I consider myself somewhat pretentiously, perhaps, as an expert on parenthood. But that is the key thing that as parents that needs to happen, is instilling the values, the courage, the self-confidence, the creativity, the willingness to take risk, and not directing kids toward, well, you're going to be a doctor, or you're going to do this, right? That's not helpful. What's helpful is giving them the courage and the positive values so that they can discover those soul purposes for themselves.
Let's flip the idea around here. If you think about what Park on Parenting here, if you think about when you think of designing a ritual for a parent, what are some of the things that you look for to say, like, that's a ritual, even if it's a 1.0 version, it's going to move the needle a little bit?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. We just did one a few months ago for a friend of mine, whose son was turning 16. And initially it started because he asked a mutual friend of ours to become his godmother. And I said, well, great, we're going to create a little ritual around this. So what we did was we gathered a small group of intimate friends. There was about 10, 12 of us. I had them put like a little fire pit in the middle of this circle. And I started with string. And I described something like this in the book, Rites to a Good Life. Anyway, I had the father and the son basically start doing circles, and they would get tangled up in the string with more and more strands surrounding them. And I said, let this symbolize for you the web of connections that you've had in your lifetime, the two of you to each other. And then, long story short, then at a certain point, I had them unravel. And I said, now you're taking a new step in your lives with each other. You will no longer, yes, you'll always be father-son, but there won't be this kind of hierarchical relationship. You're going to be more co-equal. And part of what's going to make that possible is freeing the son from his sense of obligation to the father, so that he can go out and begin to discover his soul's purpose. So they unraveled themselves for a while, and then I had them think about what their new life is going to be like, right? Their new relationship, and then kneel down and burn the string over the fire to release them and make it clear that they were separate individuals now, co-equals. And then we just blessed the hell out of both of them, right? Because that's how every ceremony really needs to end, every ritual. So it can be as simple as that, but there's even more simple versions for all kinds of things.
What I hear in that is a design of almost showing how we're on life roads together, how that all of our lives really happen for us, not to us. And bringing that, like that symbology of the string was really nice, but then also using your surroundings to symbolize the individuality that we all still have, but also reminding us that we still are part of that same journey where we started in the beginning.
Yes.
And that whether you're in a military or whether you're active duty or a veteran, you still are all part of that. It's the same reason like when Vets Roll goes to Washington, D.C. and those World War II veterans or the Korean veterans, they spark up a relationship like it was there from the beginning. And we have that thread that was broken by a DD-214, but we still are able to reconnect that story, but we don't remember that that's something we have to almost pursue, that invitation to go rekindle that string and reconnect to remember what we had at the beginning.
Yeah, well, that's something that you can see multiple times in the 5-film series that I recently finished called Veterans Journey Home. And there's one of the stories is called Ben's Story. It's about a wonderful Army man who lives not far from you in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We filmed him for close to 2 years. And in one of the scenes, he's down in Florida visiting his dad, and he walks into a VFW center. And as soon as he walks in, they're all on each other like flies on shit, man. I mean, this is a young man who's in there basically with World War II vets, and they just take him in and love on him. And it's beautiful to see, because that brotherhood, that bond lasts, for all veterans, because they recognize each other, right? They've been through this rite of passage together, so that they know that they're initiated.
And this is something as a Marine, I have to the end of my life, but it was something that I felt it was easy to be a Marine in the Marine Corps, to do what they needed me to be. But to be a Marine in the context of what it was like to live this legacy of multiple hundreds of years, and to realize that it was a brotherhood and people that had passed, I carry that legacy within me, and I can connect with any Marine, and it would be like yesterday, and we can all compare notes. I don't even realize the value what I walk around with on many days early on. Like, I was lost as a veteran for about 15 years until I was like, I think I need to turn around and reconnect with this idea of being a veteran. And that was part of the reason how this podcast was born, is my own journey to come home and realizing we have these tools, but it's the societal knowledge of what the default manism, where men are meant to do life alone. Like that lie that we've been told for the last 200 years, especially since the last 100, when we started going into factories, that really was like the beginning of the end for this invitation that men can do life together.
Exactly. And I call that the male disease, that cultural lie that we all inherited from our birth, and me more than you because of the age difference. I mean, for me, of course, it was John Wayne. He was the paragon of masculinity, right? The lie is do it alone, right? Go it alone. And that you can't share your feelings, your hurts, your concerns, any of that with anyone. And that is killing us, literally, as men. That lie is killing us. Because what do men do? They turn to drink, drugs, some addiction, right? And frankly, a friend of mine, a beautiful man, actually, who's a Navajo medicine man, who I just saw in Santa Fe a few weeks ago when we showed our veterans films, he said something that's really stuck with me. He said, the secrets that we don't share kill us. And actually, that's not quite right, but that's close. But so you get the point. And bless his heart, he was there at the screenings to talk about the Navajo rituals that they use for veterans, so that when veterans come home, they don't just say, welcome home, and here's, go back into the village, here's your wife and family. No, they say, you've got to do a whole number of different rituals before we're going to basically allow you to resume your position in society. And so he talked about some of those rituals, and they're just beautiful. So,
I can imagine it's enriched with the World War II Navajo stories of the code talkers. Like, I can only imagine the depth of those rituals of when they first went off into war and had this magical ability to hide their language, and then come home and also realize they weaponized their heritage, but at the same time they did what they were doing for their country. And to lessen that burden, I can only imagine. I'm definitely going to Google that after we get off this interview, because I can imagine there's some depth there of some stories, and witnessing it, I'm sure, changed you forever, like you just mentioned.
Oh, God, yes. Yeah. No, it was just beautiful. And needless to say, I mean, so many Native Americans have a proud tradition of warriorship, but each different indigenous tribe had their own rituals of return. I mean, as I understand it, the Lakota people would not allow the veterans to return from battle, again, not directly into the village. They would sequester them in a separate village for up to a month or two until they could decompress, share all of the stories and all of the hardships and all of the heartache and wounding that they've been through, physical and psychological, and then do a number of rituals and then be welcomed ritually back into the community. So that's really fundamental.
I'm also hearing that hopefully maybe this is an opportunity for the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps recently made the announcement that we're not going to be treated like inventory anymore, which them using that language is just an epiphany of itself. Of like, really? This is what you're finally now admitting with everybody? We're not just bodies that you move around to do work parties, and realizing that we're a human person with a story, with a heart, and that's a process you have to manage within the military to keep people around in order, understanding that this. And it's actually even a little bit worse because of my Marine Corps. Someone recently pointed out this year that the ones that joined after 9/11, they're just now getting out. They've sucked all this up for 20 years and kept it suppressed. We're actually really just on the front lines of this ritual crisis of not having people. And they're also probably removed from the wars when they did serve. So they've had time to be in this lie for 10 years, probably, when they got out and when the rotation stopped happening as much. And now they're getting ready to enter the civilian world, and they're almost like a ticking time bomb of waiting for that ritual, but no one really gives them the language that you need this process. And there is a process that it's not magic. It's something that actually works and your soul is learning for.
Exactly. And as we both know, the stats are off the charts because they're not being given these fundamental community-based rituals, the suicides, the drug and alcohol addiction, the divorce, the homelessness, the unemployment, the imprisonment, right? And it's heartbreaking and it's all unnecessary. So my deepest, fondest wish with this 5-film series that we're putting out into the world is that we're going to change the way the VA and the Pentagon think about that transition back from service into civilian life. And yes, it can be as simple as understanding reverse boot camp is what's required. But how do we do that? And we don't want those institutions necessarily to do the rituals, but they need to understand that they're necessary and where to go to recommend for veterans to get that. Because at fundament, all that's really needed is what I just said about the Lakota. Basically, veterans need to be in sacred, safe, ritual spaces where they know that they're safe and that they can decompress and share whatever they need to share about service, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and be loved and accepted for it, no matter what. And that's as Ed Tick, Dr. Ed Tick, points out in one of the books that he's written about veterans' return, that symbolically lifts the psychic burden off the veteran and puts it where it belongs, on the collective, on the community, so that we as citizens hold that with and for the veterans. And that's what needs to happen. So the problem, in a sense, is really not veterans when they come back. They're not fucked up, in a sense. They haven't done anything wrong. The problem is society does not know how to receive them anymore. And so that's our job, is to educate them on how to receive them.
I've often loved to flip. Everybody always talks about thanking you for your service. It's very common. It happens regularly. And the best way to flip it that I've heard is don't thank us for our service, but welcome us home, because most veterans have never heard those words. And most of us are still living a war, and we're waiting for that trigger word almost to like, oh, maybe I haven't come home. And as you say that, I realize that that's really the step one, is welcoming them home. But then also, this is one of my most common message I share on Veterans Day, that there's veterans sitting on the buddy bench, like at playgrounds where I gave this message at my kid's school, and they're just waiting for a Forrest Gump type moment to people sit on this bench and just fucking hear this man's story. Exactly. And that burden of just hearing someone's story, they're just looking for a friend to be seen, and that visibility that we're not just ghosts walking around here. Exactly. That's the process of how you think us for our service. Exactly.
And I tell people all the time, don't just give them a handshake and that statement, because too many citizens feel like, okay, I've done my job now.
I've lifted my burden off my shoulders.
Fuck you. No, you have not. And as my friend Captain Matthew Griffin, a former Army Ranger, puts it, he said, just ask me, what was your service like? Don't just thank me for it. Say, do you mind hearing what it was like, so I can share with you the complexities, the contradictions, all of my confusion around it? Please do that. So offer vets a cup of coffee, a lunch, whatever, and say, all I want to do is hear what you want to share.
I absolutely love that. And recently have, like I mentioned before we even recorded this, realizing this idea of sharing that burden. The one thing that I was left thinking about after listening to your book is like, I felt like it was this fountain of knowledge that like every human being needs to hear. But one thing I really struggled with was from my place in the world as one single person. I'm a little bit level up because I have a podcast and I'm sharing this interview to hopefully expand it a little bit. But what hope do I have to help change the world and how they view rituals and changing the narrative around helping people become better men? Like that was a common thought of like, it almost seemed too big to deal with. And I'm sure to you is like that, like there, but I felt almost a burden on me. Like, how do I take this knowledge and do something with it to change it and help someone around me?
Well, what hope do you not have? What hope do you not have? In other words, how can you live knowing what you know and not acting upon it, right? To do so, it's like almost turning your back on your wife or your kids. You can't do that, right? Because it's the love that you now have for your deepened sense of your own place in this lifetime. You know the old parable of the starfish, right? And this guy's walking along, he's throwing starfish back, and there's thousands of them. Somebody goes, well, what the fuck? It's not going to help anything. It's going to help this one. He throws it in, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that because, like I said, it felt like this monumental, like the whole world needs to hear this. And the way you just described it, like not the whole world. I mean, the whole world would be nice, but all you really need is one person.
Exactly.
And that one is and I would almost, as I reflect back and think through this whole thought of questioning that's now backfired in my face, I'm already doing what I need to do after listening to this book and having this conversation and continuing to put it out there. And however, listen to this episode, affect them and give them the same information as well.
Well, and you are going to be that much better father to your kids, that much better husband to your wife, that much better community member in your town. I mean, and who knows where those things are going to ripple out, right? It's beautiful. And that's all we can do is start with ourselves.
When I think of what we just talked about, when I think of what I do, I think because of instantly what I did was almost, it got so big, I didn't feel like I could do anything. And this often happens in my own head thousands of times a day sometimes, is I forget how close leadership can really be. And like you just reminded me, leading my kids is my primary objective, despite everything else that I do or say. And no matter how I probably try not to, I'm never going to be able to unhear this information. And it's going to show up. And remembering that, like, as I said, like, where does a person start? Like, my advice to myself would be you start at home within the four walls of your home, and you start like, how do you create rituals to invite my wife home, who's the one that goes off into the world and works and brings that money home? And how do I create a ritual around that? How do I create a ritual on my kids coming home off the bus to help them take away the burden of the day and the burned out friedness of listening to someone every day and following directions all day? Because I can feel it in their energy sometimes. They're like, they're just fried from listening and they need a space to decompress as well. So again, as I self-therapy this idea, it's already kind of saturating in different areas that I was overlooking, because at first it seemed so big. It seemed like too big of an elephant to begin, but then again, you eat an elephant one bite at a time.
Exactly. And, I talk about in the book that, I'll back up. I mean, one of my great intentions with the book is to de-intimidate people, right? If that's a word, right? To get people to feel, that, oh my God, no, I need the priest, or I need a medicine man, or I need a sage or a wise. No, we can all do this. And you know what? It's as simple as two factors: intention and attention. That's it. And so to get practical, what you might do with your kids after school is once you get home, say, kids, we're going to take 5 minutes. And I want to set an intention for you to just decompress and wipe away all of the baggage that you're carrying from your school day, however stressful it was. And we're going to sit here together for 5 minutes. And I don't know your kids, but maybe sitting in silence would be a good thing. Just sitting there together in silence. And you could ring a little bell or light a candle or something. And then after that, all hell breaks loose. You can go play, you do whatever you want, right? But we're going to do that little ritual. And that's all it takes is an intention to wipe away the baggage they're carrying and attention to what shows up. And they might say, oh, great idea, Dad, but I'd rather do this. And then you go, fine, let's do that.
And I love the attention, because one of my favorite pieces of advice to give when you feel lost to what to do, give them the keys to the bus. So my kids are 9, 7, and 5, so their ideas are often limited, but they're often very simple. So what seems like super complicated to me is like 3 words to them, and they're a kid in a candy store. And it was like this whole thing that had to be like, no medicine men needed to show up, and we didn't need to pull out the burn fire in the backyard. Like, it was a lot. And like, even as I think about it, something as simple as like inviting them to color the table in some coloring books as a family, and letting that just kind of, because coloring is very relaxing. You're just focusing on coloring, and it's just kind of decompressing everything at the same time. And conversation can happen as well of something that may need to be shared. Well, actually, I never even realized this is a ritual until you just brought this up. But one of the rituals I've often always talk about is bedtime talk. And it began because I got tired of trying to fight 3 kids with one book at the same time. So I was like, I'm just going to read a book, all 3 of you, separately. And it became this ritual of one-on-one time with Dad every night, that we could talk about anything. We could share the load. My daughter, who's in 4th grade, like, to her, the world is so intense, and the emotions and fighting for popularity, and kids and everything can go on in 4th grade. They're emotionally aware, but they're very insecure by the world as well. We talk about so many different things. And a win that just happened was, and you appreciate this, she came down at lunchtime and she's like, Dad, this is super random, but really want to show appreciation for you always listening to these random things that are in my head and I don't know what to do with them. And one of them was something weird, like a boy pulled down his pants and showed his underwear on the bus. It happened like months ago before she told me, but it was still rattling around in her head. And just getting it out, repeating it multiple times, and random things like that. She's like, I just have more I have more room for joy, more room to be happy. And I was just like, wow, you have something that 40-year-olds don't have. And even she's only 9, so I can only imagine how this ritual is inviting her into a richer life that I can't even yet fathom of where she can go.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it doesn't have to be big and complicated. You know, in a sense, you could think of it as saying time out to time and just say, I just want to say time out. Let's consecrate this moment in time, and let's just do it in our own unique way because of the individuals that we are and our own unique personalities. And so it can look like anything. But we don't do that anymore. And for whatever reason, what's coming to my mind is a friend of mine recently told me about his son who got his first job. And I said, you damn well better have a little ritual to celebrate that with him. And it's just saying, time out. Son, I want to recognize you and this moment in time. This is big. You're stepping up to adult responsibility here. And you are going to be accountable. And you are going to be in integrity with your boss for doing this job that you're committed to, and you're going to get the rewards of a certain amount of money for it. So I honor you. I honor you and I bless you for taking this step onto your manhood. That's it. That's all. I mean, how long did that take for me to describe it? 20 seconds. You know, it can be that simple.
And those are often the moments that you probably felt like you were missing, but those are the moments that like kids remember forever. There's a story I just recently heard. His dad made an effort to drive his semi-truck that he drove lumber and delivered in Milwaukee, and he drove by and honked a horn at a sporting event that he wasn't able to be there, but he wanted to drive by and make an appearance. And all the kids worshipped him for having his dad honk the horn as he drove by. And he's like 55 years old right now, and he still remembered that moment of intention and ritual. Like, I know I can't be there, but I want to be there. And it's those moments that we gloss over that have the most depth and capability to grow the deepest roots in our life as well.
Right, because they're spontaneous, right? You know, we don't have to go to church for them. We just integrate them into ongoing daily life.
I absolutely love that whole crescendo into that information there. So unfortunately, like I said, this is going to be a hard interview to end because we could go on and talk about these rituals forever, but unfortunately we do. So Frederick, I want to appreciate you for having the courage to write this book, having the courage to go out there and share your story and open your heart to the world, because I'm sure that's what those men reflected back when you were 40 at that ritual and retreat. And you're still, as you're understanding it, still understanding the invitation that they gave you and helped you understand and step into. So I appreciate everything you're doing. And where if people want to get connected to the work work that you're doing, where's the best place to follow some of the work? We'll have the links for the show notes of the videos and the book, but where's the people can follow you?
Well, my company is Warrior Films, and it's warriorfilms.org. We're a nonprofit 501c3. Our mission is very simple: bearing witness, creating change. So we bear witness to the sufferings and the joys of human life. And we use these powerful stories to create social change, to encourage people to undergo their own human transformation. So yeah, you can find all of it on our site. And please sign up, join us too, get on our newsletters. We'd welcome you to our extended family, our community.
Well, I appreciate that, Frederick, and I'll have all of those down in the show notes for anybody that wants to take action on that. Frederick, thank you for joining us on Military Veteran Dad today. I am honored and humbled that you appeared here, and now I get to count you as a friend in my life and this journey of creating rituals. In a world that seems overwhelming, but as we just diagnosed in my own little psychiatric therapy session there, I am more capable than I first believed.
Absolutely. And I bless you for the dad that you are, and undergoing your own soul's journey with integrity like you are. I see that in you, and I want to honor you.
Thank you for that. Hey guys, thank you as always for listening to this episode. And this episode was super special because it went into the actual core crux of the problems that veterans face, the transitioning, the burden that we carry that we don't actually get to share, this ability that we go to war and we should just be able to come home and snap our fingers and go back to normal. But those things aren't normal, but yet that's how society assigns them to us. So for me, the big takeaway of this episode is illuminating the gap, illuminating the part that's missing in welcoming home veterans. And the irony in this podcast has always been, and I continue to find it that way, is the mission was always to bring every dad home. And this episode really put an extra layer to that process. Of part of the process of coming home is sharing the burden of what you saw, sharing whatever it is that you carry on your shoulders, whether you went to war, whether you didn't. We all experience military in different ways, and learning to share the load of that process is something I've talked about, but in this kind of put a nice frame around it, what that process. And I really liked the tying it back to the American Indian traditions of how the Navajos would come home, but they wouldn't be allowed to come home, that there is this process to de-cleanse the energy that they would bring with them. And so part of our process as veterans, as people, as brothers and sisters, is to recognize, to create spaces for your brothers and sisters to share what they saw, to share what they went through, and to create that space for them to move through it. Because there's one thing that I always come to the conclusion, any conversation I'm having with the dad, there's these stories, no matter whether they went to a war or not, there's these stories that just are a burden on their heart and they need to shed them. And part of that process is here, where you're finding community where they're willing to share. And if you're not a veteran listening to this, make sure you pick up on asking a veteran, tell me what your experience was like. Don't just listen to understand. And the more you can understand, the more that person can shed some of that burden that they may carry on their heart. That is all I have for you guys today. I hope that you have an amazing week. There is going to be a Fatherhood Friday this week. There's been a topic that I've been talking over at the Business of Fatherhood, and I'm going to bring it here for one special Fatherhood Friday, and it's about generational trauma and its effect on the military. So don't want to miss that. Again, check out Fatherhood Friday coming up on this week, and I will talk to you guys again on Friday.